World War II was the deadliest conflict in human history. Over 60 million people died. Entire nations were leveled. Generations were scarred beyond repair. And when the dust finally settled, the world pointed its finger at one man, Adolf Hitler. But here is the question almost nobody asks. Where did the money come from? Hitler did not build his war machine out of thin air. Germany in the early 1930s was a broken country. Hyperinflation had destroyed the currency. Unemployment was catastrophic. The nation was buried under crushing war reparations from the Treaty of Versailles. And yet, within just 6 years, this bankrupt nation transformed into the most powerful military force Europe had ever seen. Tanks, warplanes, submarines, rockets, an army of millions, equipped, fed, and mobilized with terrifying precision. That does not happen without money, enormous amounts of money. And if you follow that money far enough, you will not end up in Berlin. You will end up in Detroit, in New York, in Standard Oil boardrooms and Ford Motor Company factories. You will find the names of corporations that are still household brands today. This is not conspiracy. This is the documented, exposed, and deliberately buried financial history of how some of the most powerful companies on Earth helped fund the rise of the Third Reich, profited from both sides of the deadliest war in history, and walked away almost untouched when it was over. This is the Financial Historian, where money, power, and history collide, and nothing is ever as simple as it looks. To understand how American capital ended up fueling Nazi Germany, you need to understand the world of the 1920s. After World War I, Germany was financially destroyed. The Treaty of Versailles demanded enormous reparations, payments so large that Germany could not realistically make them. The economy spiraled. Hyperinflation hit so hard that people carried wheelbarrows of banknotes just to buy bread. By 1923, a single American dollar was worth over 4 trillion German marks. But here is the paradox. While Germany was collapsing, American bankers saw opportunity. A desperate nation with vast industrial potential, cheap labor, and a government willing to accept almost any terms just to survive. Wall Street stepped in. In 1924, a plan was crafted, named after American banker Charles Dawes. The Dawes Plan restructured Germany's reparations and, critically, opened the floodgates for American loans to pour into the German economy. Billions of dollars flowed from New York into German industry. Banks like J.P. Morgan and Dillon Reid became the financial architects of Germany's recovery. American money rebuilt German factories, funded German steel production, and modernized German infrastructure. Think about that for a moment. The very industrial base that would later produce Tiger tanks and Messerschmitt fighters was built with American dollars. Not secretly, not through back channels, through official, celebrated financial agreements. And it was not just bankers. American corporations rushed in to claim their piece of the German market. General Motors bought Opel, Germany's largest automaker, in 1929. Ford Motor Company had been operating in Germany since 1925, building a major plant in Cologne. Standard Oil entered into deep partnerships with IG Farben, the German chemical giant that would later produce Zyklon B, the gas used in the Holocaust. By the time Hitler came to power in 1933, American corporate fingerprints were already embedded in the German economy. And here is the uncomfortable truth. They did not pull out, they doubled down. Let us start with Henry Ford, because his story is not just about business, it is personal. Ford was the most famous industrialist in the world. His assembly lines had revolutionized manufacturing. His name was synonymous with American innovation. But Ford was also a vicious anti-Semite. In 1920, Ford began publishing a newspaper called the Dearborn Independent. Over the next 7 years, it ran a relentless series of articles blaming Jewish people for virtually every problem in the world, from communism to jazz music to the decline of morality. Ford collected these articles into a book called The International Jew, which was translated into 16 languages and became a bestseller in Germany. Adolf Hitler read it, he admired it. He kept a portrait of Henry Ford on his office wall. In Mein Kampf, Hitler singled out Ford as the only American he respected, writing that Ford's ideas were an inspiration. This was not a vague connection. It was a direct, documented intellectual pipeline from a Detroit factory owner to the leader of the Nazi movement. But Ford's support was not just ideological, it was industrial. Ford's Cologne plant continued operating under the Nazi regime. It produced military trucks for the Wehrmacht. Ford Werke, the German subsidiary, used forced labor during the war, including prisoners from concentration camps. Ford trucks carried German soldiers across Europe. And after the war, Ford Motor Company filed a claim with the United States government for damages to its German factories caused by Allied bombing and received compensation. Read that again. Ford built trucks for the Nazis. Allied bombers destroyed those factories, and Ford collected money from the American taxpayer for the damage. The company profited from building the war machine, and then profited again from its destruction. That is not tragedy, that is business model, but Ford was not alone. Not even close. General Motors owned Opel, and Opel was one of the largest military vehicle producers for Nazi Germany. Before the war, Opel manufactured cars and trucks. Once the war began, those same factories shifted to producing military transport vehicles, aircraft engines, and landmines. At its peak, Opel was producing thousands of Blitz trucks, the backbone of the Wehrmacht's logistics network. General Motors executives knew exactly what their German subsidiary was doing. Internal documents show that GM's leadership was aware that Opel had converted to military production. And yet, they maintained their ownership. They collected dividends. And like Ford, after the war, General Motors filed claims for bomb damage to the Opel factories and received millions in tax deductions and reparations. The soldiers who died fighting German forces were killed by equipment made in factories owned by American corporations. And after the war, those same corporations were compensated for the inconvenience. If that makes your blood boil, it should. Now let us talk about the company whose role in the Nazi regime is perhaps the most chilling of all. IBM, International Business Machines. Today, IBM is known for computers and cloud services. But in the 1930s and 40s, IBM's core product was the Hollerith punch card system, a mechanical data processing technology that could sort, count, and categorize vast amounts of information with unprecedented speed. Nazi Germany had a problem. It wanted to identify, track, and ultimately exterminate millions of people: Jews, Roma, political prisoners, disabled individuals. But how do you manage genocide on an industrial scale? You need data. You need to know who is Jewish, where they live, what they own, and where they can be found. IBM, through its German subsidiary Dehomag, provided exactly that. Punch card systems were deployed across Germany and later across occupied Europe. Census data was processed through IBM machines. Concentration camps used IBM systems to track prisoners, assigning each one a number, a category, and a fate. The 5-digit numbers tattooed on the arms of Auschwitz prisoners corresponded to entries in an IBM database. IBM's founder and chairman, Thomas Watson, personally oversaw the German operations. He visited Germany. He met with Nazi officials. In 1937, Watson received the Merit Cross of the German Eagle, one of the highest honors the Nazi regime could bestow on a foreign citizen. He accepted it at a ceremony in Berlin. IBM did not stumble into complicity. It engineered it. Custom punch card formats were designed specifically for the Nazi regime's needs. Dehomag technicians trained German officials on how to use the systems. When the machines needed maintenance, IBM service engineers were dispatched. The company did not merely sell a product and walk away. It provided ongoing technical support for a system of organized mass murder. After the war, IBM reclaimed its German subsidiary, recovered its machines, and continued business as if nothing had happened. No executive was prosecuted, no reparations were paid to victims. The corporation that helped mechanize the Holocaust simply moved on to the next product cycle. But the corporate entanglement with Nazi Germany went even deeper than trucks and punch cards. It went into the chemistry of war itself. Standard Oil of New Jersey, one of the most powerful companies in the world, had entered into a partnership with IG Farben in the late 1920s. IG Farben was a German chemical conglomerate, the largest corporation in Europe, and it would become the industrial backbone of the Nazi war effort. The partnership was built around patents. Standard Oil and IG Farben agreed to share technology related to synthetic fuel and synthetic rubber. For Standard Oil, the deal was commercially attractive. For Germany, it was strategically essential. Germany had almost no domestic oil supply. Without synthetic fuel, the Wehrmacht could not move. Without synthetic rubber, it could not equip its forces. IG Farben's ability to produce these materials was quite literally what made blitzkrieg possible, and IG Farben got that technology partly from Standard Oil. But the story gets darker. When war broke out, the partnership did not simply end. Standard Oil continued to honor aspects of the agreement even after hostilities began. Meanwhile, IG Farben expanded its operations into one of the most horrifying chapters of the war. The company built a massive synthetic rubber plant at a location called Monowitz, right next to Auschwitz. It used slave labor from the concentration camp. Prisoners were worked to death, literally. IG Farben paid the SS a daily fee for each laborer, about 4 marks per day for skilled workers and 3 marks for unskilled ones. Human beings, rented like machines, worked until they collapsed, then replaced by the next shipment from the camp. And the gas used in the chambers at Auschwitz, Zyklon B, was manufactured by a subsidiary of IG Farben. The same corporate family tree that shared patents with Standard Oil produced the poison that killed over 1 million people at that single camp. After the war, IG Farben was broken up. Some of its successor companies, Bayer, BASF, and Holocaust, went on to become global pharmaceutical and chemical giants. Executives were tried at Nuremberg. A few received short prison sentences. Most were released within years and returned to corporate leadership. The machine was dismantled on paper, but its DNA lived on. And then there were the banks, the financial arteries that kept the blood of commerce flowing between American capital and German ambition. Chase National Bank, the predecessor of today's J.P. Morgan Chase, maintained its Paris branch throughout the German occupation of France. The branch operated under German supervision and reportedly froze the accounts of Jewish customers while continuing to serve German interests. Union Banking Corporation, based in New York, was even more directly entangled. Its assets were seized by the United States government in 1942 under the Trading with the Enemy Act. Among its directors was Prescott Bush, a Wall Street banker who would later become a United States senator, and whose son and grandson would both become presidents. The bank had served as a clearinghouse for Fritz Thyssen, a German industrialist who was one of Hitler's earliest and most important financial backers. Thyssen had begun funding the Nazi Party as early as the mid-1920s. His money helped the Nazis grow from a fringe movement into a national political force, and his financial operations ran through Union Banking Corporation in New York. American banking infrastructure was, quite literally, a conduit for money flowing to the Nazi movement. Now, step back and see the full picture. Ford built the trucks, General Motors built the engines. IBM processed the data. Standard Oil and IG Farben fueled and armed the Wehrmacht. Chase Bank handled the finances. Union Banking Corporation moved money for Nazi industrialists. These were not fringe operators or shady middlemen. These were the crown jewels of American capitalism, and not one of them was seriously held accountable. After the war, the United States government pursued a policy of pragmatic forgetting. Corporations were needed for the post-war recovery. German industry had to be rebuilt to serve as a bulwark against the Soviet Union. Cold War priorities replaced wartime morality. The same factories that had built weapons for Hitler were retooled to produce goods for the Marshall Plan. The same executives who had collaborated with the Nazis were quietly rehabilitated. Justice was sacrificed on the altar of strategy, and the corporations that had profited from the deadliest conflict in human history simply adjusted their balance sheets and moved forward. But there is another layer to this story, one that most people never consider. It was not just American corporations that funded the war. Neutral nations played a critical role as financial intermediaries, and no country did this more effectively than Switzerland. Swiss banks became the laundering machines of the war economy. Gold looted by the Nazis from occupied countries and from the victims of the Holocaust was funneled through Swiss financial institutions. The Swiss National Bank accepted gold from the German Reichsbank, even when it was widely known that much of it had been seized from conquered nations or stripped from concentration camp victims, including gold extracted from dental fillings. Switzerland's neutrality was not passive innocence, it was active business strategy. By remaining neutral, Swiss banks could serve both sides. They processed transactions for the Allies and the Axis. They stored assets for fleeing refugees and for fleeing war criminals. They provided the financial lubrication that kept the machinery of war turning. After the war, Swiss banks stonewalled for decades. When survivors or their families came looking for accounts opened before the war, they were turned away, told that without death certificates, which concentration camps did not issue, no claims could be processed. It took until the late 1990s, more than 50 years after the war ended, for Swiss banks to finally reach a settlement of $1.25 billion with Holocaust survivors, a fraction of what had been stolen, a footnote to a crime that defined a century. So, what does all of this mean for you today? If you think this is just ancient history, think again. The pattern of corporations profiting from conflict did not end in 1945. It accelerated. During the Vietnam War, companies like Dow Chemical produced napalm and Agent Orange while their stock prices climbed. During the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, defense contractors like Halliburton, Lockheed Martin, and Raytheon generated hundreds of billions in revenue. Private military companies staffed war zones while their shareholders counted dividends. The logic has not changed since the 1930s. War is expensive. Someone has to build the weapons, fuel the vehicles, feed the soldiers, process the data. And whoever does that work gets paid, regardless of which side they serve or how many people die in the process. Corporations do not have morality. They have quarterly earnings reports. And here is the deeper lesson, the one that should keep you awake at night. The rise of Hitler was not funded by evil geniuses in dark rooms. It was funded by ordinary business decisions made by ordinary executives in ordinary boardrooms. Each decision made sense in isolation. Invest in Germany because the returns are high. Maintain the subsidiary because it is profitable. Supply the technology because the contract is legal. Accept the award because it is good for public relations. No single decision looked monstrous at the time, but together, they built a monster. That is how it always works. Systems of destruction are rarely built by villains twirling their mustaches. They are built by rational actors pursuing rational interests within systems that reward profit above all else. And if you do not understand that, you will not see it happening again, because it is happening again, right now. Somewhere in the world, a corporation is supplying technology to a regime that uses it to surveil, oppress, or kill its own citizens. Somewhere, a bank is processing transactions that fund conflict. Somewhere, an executive is signing a contract that will cost lives, and the quarterly report will call it revenue growth. The faces change, the uniforms change, the logos on the letterhead change, but the financial architecture of complicity remains identical to what it was in 1933. So, what should you take away from this? First, follow the money, always. When someone tells you a war is about freedom, about democracy, about ideology, ask who is getting paid, because behind every conflict, there is a balance sheet. And that balance sheet will tell you more about the real causes of war than any political speech ever will. Second, never confuse legality with morality. Everything Ford, GM, IBM, and Standard Oil did in Nazi Germany was technically legal at the time. Legal frameworks are written by the powerful to protect the powerful. If you wait for the law to tell you what is right, you will always be too late. Third, understand that corporations are not your friends. They are engines designed to maximize shareholder value. When that goal aligns with human welfare, wonderful. When it does not, human welfare loses. Every single time. The same company that sells you a car today would sell tanks to a dictator tomorrow if the margins were right and the lawyers approved it. And finally, remember this. The 60 million people who died in World War II did not die because one madman seized power. They died because an entire system, financial, industrial, and political, enabled him. Hitler was the face, but the body of the machine was built in boardrooms from Detroit to New York to Zurich. Soldiers paid with their blood. Civilians paid with their lives. And corporations counted their profits. That is the hidden financial history of World War II. Not the story of heroes and villains they teach you in school, but the story of money flowing silently beneath the surface, funding destruction on one side and collecting dividends on the other. History does not repeat exactly. But if you do not understand it, it will crush you just the same as it crushed everyone else. The names on the buildings change. The money never stops moving. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I will show you where to look.